Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a massive chapter in American history, the road to the Civil War.
Think about this for a second. In 1789, the United States is formed. Just 72 years later, it literally tears itself apart. Why? How does that even happen? Well, that's what we're going to unpack. We're going to look at how a fundamental question, one that was baked right into the country's design from day one, led straight to the Civil War.
And believe it or not, the story really starts with this one core idea, something absolutely central to the U.S. federalism.
So what is federalism? Well, you can think of it like a constant balancing act, right? Power is supposed to be shared between the big national government and the individual state governments. But from the very start, a couple of huge questions were just hanging in the air. Like, what is this union, really? And where do you draw the line? Where does federal power stop and state power kick in?
Okay, so let's be super clear. Historians are pretty much all on the same page. Slavery was the central driving cause of the war, no question. But it's not that simple. That core conflict was all tangled up with these deep economic and political splits. And it all came back to that question of federalism. For example, you had these high tariffs meant to help northern industries. But for the South, which relied on agriculture and exports, those same tariffs were a huge economic blow. So you see, these weren't just arguments about money. They were full-blown battles over who had the right to make these decisions, the federal government or the individual states.
And then, as the country started expanding, pushing west, a whole new, and I mean explosive, question popped up. What do we do with all this new land? Will these new territories allow slavery or not? How they answered that question, well, it threatened to just rip the whole fragile union to shreds.
So in 1820, Congress steps in. They try to defuse what's basically a ticking time bomb. Their solution? The Missouri Compromise. They pretty much just drew a line straight across the country. Everything north of that line, no slavery. Everything south of it, slavery was allowed. It seemed like a simple, clean solution, right? A geographic fix to keep everyone from fighting.
And you can see it right here. This map from back then shows that line, the 36° 30 parallel, perfectly. It created this very delicate but super clear balance between free states and slave states. And you know what? For a little while, it actually worked. It held the country together.
But, yeah, in 1854, a new law came along. And it didn't just poke a hole in this compromise. It blew the whole thing to pieces.
Okay, we really need to talk about the Kansas-Nebraska Act, because this thing is a huge turning point. First, it just completely erased that line from the map. Gone. And in its place, it brought in this idea of popular sovereignty. Basically, it said, hey, let's just let the people who actually move to these new territories vote on whether they want slavery or not. Now, on the surface, that sounds totally democratic, doesn't it? What could possibly go wrong? The guy who wrote it, Senator Stephen Douglas, he was sure this was the answer. He really thought this was the democratic solution that would finally put the whole debate to rest and bring peace to the country.
Yeah, he could not have been more wrong. Instead of peace, it ignited an absolute firestorm. It kicked off this mad, frantic dash, a brutal race, really, to get settlers into Kansas, all just to win that one crucial vote.
And the result? It was basically a horrifying mini-civil war. The territory got a new name, Bleeding Kansas. And it was a grim, bloody preview, a terrible foreshadowing of the massive conflict that was just around the corner.
So all that violence in Kansas, it just pushed the whole nation right to the edge. And by the time the 1860 presidential election comes around, the political system itself is just cracking apart along those exact same lines.
And just look at this. It shows you everything you need to know about the political breakdown. You don't have just two major candidates, you have four. The Democratic Party just couldn't hold it together. They couldn't agree on slavery, so they literally split in two. A northern faction that was still pushing for popular sovereignty, and a southern faction that was demanding the federal government protect slavery everywhere.
And then, of course, you have the new Republican Party and their candidate, Abraham Lincoln. He'd already made his stance crystal clear a couple of years before this. He said, look, this division can't last. The country could not survive being half slave and half free. It was going to have to become all one thing or all the other.
So when Abraham Lincoln actually won the presidency, and get this, he won it without carrying a single southern state. That was it. That was the final breaking point.
I mean, this electoral map just says it all, doesn't it? This isn't a map of one country. It's a map of two completely separate regions voting in total opposition to each other. You have Lincoln sweeping the north and Breckinridge taking the deep south. The country was, literally, fractured in two.
And here's the kicker. Lincoln became president with less than 40% of the popular vote. So from the South's perspective, this guy was a purely regional president, someone who was hostile to their entire way of life, elected without a single vote from them.
For the slaveholding states, Lincoln's victory was it, the final straw. They felt like their power, their voice in the Union, was just gone, for good. And so, just a month after the election, South Carolina makes this drastic, fateful move. It secedes from the Union.
And once that first domino fell, the rest went down fast. Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, they all followed within just a few weeks. By February of 1861, they'd created their own government, the Confederate States of America. The stage for war was now set.
You know, the Civil War answered the question of secession in the most brutal way possible. A state can't just leave the Union. But that original tension, that fundamental debate over the balance of power between the states and the national government, that question of federalism, it is as alive today as it was back then. It's still a core battle line in American politics, which really makes you stop and think, what does a more perfect union even mean for us today?